Hey there. Last week I did a review of Dr. Paige Martin's Hydrus Watercolors, and I wanted to follow up with another video that actually shows me using them so you can see for yourself how they actually work in real life. And I also want to answer some of the questions in a more broad way so that other people can have access to the answers in case you have the same ones. The first question I had about these was actually not to do with the paint, but what is that sound made in my water? That's actually glass beads. And I actually just buy these at the dollar store. It finds that it kicks off and cleans my brushes a lot faster and a lot better than just having a jar alone. So that's the sound in all my videos that you're hearing. So I thought that might be useful. Dollar store, $1. You can fill all your jars with those and get much cleaner brushes. Another question I had was, do I mark my bottles? And by the way, I've since purchased 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more colors because I love them so much. Do I mark my bottles because the colors inside don't really tell you what color they are? I actually find that the colors do let me know pretty well, but I forgot to mention in the video that I actually swatch all my colors in my watercolor swatch book. So all my watercolors, my little sets, get a dedicated page. So I actually do that. And I do swatch them at full strength. Now, this seemed to really piss a lot of people off. And I cannot for the life of me understand why. Yeah, people felt very strongly that they have to be watered down. You cannot use them full strength. You cannot just see what the color was. And I actually respectfully super disagree. I think you can, of course, add water, and that's an amazing way to use them and a great intention. You get a full range of value spectrum by just adding water. But why the heck couldn't you use them full strength? I use them full strength all the time when I want to pack a super strong color punch. I think it's a super valid way to work. So of course you can use them undiluted. You don't have to do anything. Okay, another great question I had was, someone actually let me know that there was another artist who adds these to her regular watercolors. I had never thought of, it's not that I hadn't thought of mixing them with other watercolors per se while I was working, but I didn't think to do that sort of like intentionally just to like vibrance one up, but you could. So that's a really cool tip. So thank you for letting me know about that. The Bumbling Crafter asked if these bloomed in the same way that watercolors do. And I will actually just turn my camera onto my page as I work. And then you can actually observe for yourself how these react in real life. And then you can decide if this is a characteristic that you like or do not about that. Oh, another person, Susan Fernandez, brought up the point that opera pink is not lightfast because it has BV10 fluorescent basic dye, which is used to dye samples on slides, which is why it's not light fast and which is why it's very stinky. And I was like, what? She calls it stinky pink. Okay, I had never heard of that and I've never noticed, so I had to actually bust out my Daniel Smith opera pink. I don't really smell anything. So I'm really trying to see if it's stinky. I'm not noticing that. I'm so sorry, Susan. Maybe everyone has different, some people's eyes are good, some are bad, some people's nose may be good, maybe mine is bad, but I just had to test that out because I've never heard that before and I don't actually smell anything. I'm so sorry, but I tried. What else? Oh, Gerardine Holland wants to know how Paige watercolors reacted to your paper already wet. I will show you a demo of how that really works. It works awesome. Again, they are super concentrated. So if you do use them at full strength on a wet piece of paper, that's essentially adding water, which is everyone feels very strongly that's something that I need to do for some reason. So you can see it reacts gorgeously. And I do use them in full strength in actual project. So you can see how that looks in just a second. Oh, a couple of people noticed that they act similarly to inktense. Now, inktense is a product by Derwent. They come in pans, they come in pencil form, they come in block form, stick form, that when fully activated actually become permanent. And these do remind me of that. What I am waiting to also demo for you today is whether these, which have dried out, to see if they will reactivate or not. So if I go into one of my projects that I've already completed using these, full strength, by the way, they will not reactivate. And I will show you that test as well. but will they reactivate in my ceramic palette? We shall see. So that is coming up. So by the end of the video, you should have a much better understanding of how they actually work in real life. So without further ado, I'm going to turn my camera around and let's go see this stuff in action. So every art piece I make is usually for a lesson, for one of my clubs at Awesome Art School, or a book that I'm publishing. And so I always have those going on at all times. And I really want to make YouTube kind of my play space. So welcome to the fun zone, my friends. And just to hopefully give you tips and tricks to help you along your art journey as well. So it's my pleasure to be demoing these Hydrus super interesting watercolor / inks today. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm mixing, I just did like half yellow ochre and permanent red. This is from set 2. I only own set 2. There's 3 sets in total, which I actually didn't even know until like 3 days ago. And then I have 7 other singular colors, which because there were no pinks or purples in the set that I had. So up until this point, I'm just working wet on dry. This is 140-pound cold press circular watercolor paper that I am currently absolutely obsessed with. I bought it at my local Jerry's Artorama. It's an Italian brand that I've never heard of before, and I am loving it. Love a circle. It's great for portraits, landscapes, pretty much everything. So every time I have an excuse to use it, I do. It's 12 inches in diameter. While she is still wet, I want to go in and add some shading, which is, it was a little risky not drying my paper first because it was still damp on her face. You definitely run the risk with watercolors and wet media that while the entire face is still wet, when you're adding a second color, it can really easily bleed. But I'm like really impatient, so I usually just take my chances, and you'll be amazed at what you can do with a little paper towel if you get it in an area that you don't want it to. And I was trying to just kind of lift on the bottom lip because the bottom lip is usually has a lovely highlight on it, and I like to preserve that if I can. So one way you can do that, one way is to just use a lighter color. Another way is just simply lift with your paper towel, and that will give you that lighter tone as well. So there's a lot of shading to this. And so I kind of went, I was going to say slow and steady. I just simply used a darker color of the skin tone, which again was just a mix of the yellow ochre and the permanent red, more ochre than red. And what I was really testing here, and it really was, this is just feeling exactly like regular watercolors at this point, by the way. I'm not feeling any of the like permanence effects, even though I know these really do set quite permanently on the paper. And you'll see that later on. That really is true. So one person had commented last week, like, they move for me. And there's quite a number of Dr. P.H. Martin products, and the bottles are all identical. So my guess is the person that commented is actually using their watercolors. Again, the ink, their watercolor, and their Hydrus bottles are all identical. So if you just didn't look at the label right away, you might not realize which one you actually have. So it can be very confusing, which is why I get so much out of demoing these for myself. It makes me a better teacher when I'm teaching at Awesome Art School, because I know exactly what my supplies are doing, how they behave, and what they're capable of, and what they're not capable of, what their limitations are. Now, I do have to emphasize the importance on working on high quality paper. You get really different results when your paper is not the best quality. So this is 100% cotton. It's amazing. And not all 100% cotton papers are created equal. Stonehenge, I hate, sorry Stonehenge, hate your paper. It just doesn't, things don't move on it for some reason. Whatever sizing is inside the paper, for me, kind of ruins its watercolor properties. Whatever it is that is a normal watercolor paper, it does not exist in Stonehenge, and you just don't get the same behavior that you do with standard archival 100% cotton paper. That being said, my other favorite paper is Fabriano, and it's only 25% cotton. It works amazingly. But you do have more absorbency when you're working with 100% cotton versus 25%. So if you can afford it, and if it's like a lovely commission or a piece you really care about, then I would splurge on some higher quality paper. It actually just makes your life easier. Your watercolors will behave a lot better for you. So it's kind of like there's a lot of bonuses for working on paper other than just being archival and like snobby and long lasting. It actually makes it way easier to work on. So that's why I like it. I just want things to be easy so I have a great day. And that's what high quality papers actually do for me, to be totally honest. All right, so now you have that kind of ugly edge is the result of the wet on wet. So you have like this sort of an ugly blend. With watercolors, all you need to do to fix that is just take a damp brush, not a wet brush, a damp brush, and run it along those lines, and that will really help coax those together. Now, this is the big test when I'm trying to reactivate my old dried out Hydrus from last week. They did it with no problem, which is weird because I can't get them to reactivate on my paper, but I can get them to move on my palette, which is so freaking weird, which is like why they're in between an ink and a watercolor. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that is their behavior. And I know that from now working with them for a few months. But I wanted to do one sort of like a new quote unquote project, a live one, so that you could actually see this in action. So again, a few people got real like almost angry that I wasn't adding water to my paints, which I just do not understand. So these are straight up concentrated, no water, because I want the color. Like I want it to look like that. So I don't understand why everyone's panties are in a twist over me not adding water. I'm still not doing it. These are the colors, so why would I add water? So when I am adding water, it's because one of two things. Either one, I do want to lighten the color genuinely, or two, I want more of the color, but I'm too lazy to go get more from the actual jar. So I'm adding water to simply make more of the color. Now, does that mean it also lightens it? It does, which is perfect when you're doing things like hair and you want it really dark against the skin so that her face like pops out against it. And then you want to ease that transition to a lighter area. Then it's amazing to start with the most concentrated color right against her face and then slowly add. I actually didn't add water. I added the second color. I started with Payne's Gray as the super darkest, and then I segued that into the darkest cobalt blue, easily reactivated by not adding water, but by adding more paint, fresh paint, and then using those in full concentrated color. And then do I then add a more watery mix to segue that into the lighter cobalt? So absolutely go for it if you want to use full concentrated water, in my total opinion. All right, here's the test. For those who are interested in how these behave wet on wet, do they bloom? What does it look like? This test is for you right now, happening on screen. So I used a ton of water, laid it down. I added super juicy wet layers on top, and you can see, I mean, it behaves just like watercolor. It's just more. It's just everything is more. It's all extra. So you would never get that level of vibrancy if you were using, maybe some of the phthalos from Daniel Smith and things are equally as staining and vibrant, but not many colors do with watercolor what these Hydrus ones do. So I was also doing very pointed tests with making them saturated, kind of making a mess, and then seeing what would happen if I could pull those out. How staining are these? That is the test I'm doing with my paper towel. Also doubles as a highlight in her hair. So I was able to lift it, and I think it's mostly because it was so wet to begin with. So wet on wet, wet paper, wet paint, and then you can lift a lot of it a lot easier. Had I tried that in the dark regions, there's no way that would have lifted as well as it did. So it's kind of cool. Again, that's pretty typical watercolor behavior, so that's nothing shocking there. And even inks, when you're working with such wetness, you can also pull those out too, because it's just wet enough. It hasn't had time to like set in your paper. So I just was lazy and I didn't clean my brush out all the way. So just keep in mind too, that's like another valid way to work. Just because you're doing wet on wet doesn't mean that it has to be water. You can also work wet on wet into other colors. So that's what I did here. Another example where I almost can't get the colors dark enough. To be frank, I wanted to have some real exaggerated dark areas, and because my paper was still wet, it was annoying because my fully concentrated colors were melting into the wet colors that were already there. So this is yet another reason why it's awesome to work with fully undiluted Hydrus colors. This is another reason why I can't understand why people were so upset about it. It's like there's so many instances where you can't get enough of the fully concentrated colors. So yeah, if you need more, go for it. If you really want it to have staying power, the solution is to dry your layers, which is what I end up doing, and then going back in with the fully concentrated color, and then it will lay on top. And because these are weird, magical, liquidy, inky, watercolory things, it's not going to disrupt the colors underneath. So that's a huge benefit of the weird quality of this paint. And it's another reason, especially as a mixed media artist where I'm using a lot of different materials in the same projects a lot of the time, not in this one because I want to just test the Hydrus on their own, but it's actually it's a hugely big advantageous quality to have in your paint because you can layer with anything on top of it, including wet sealers. You can brush on things and it's not going to disrupt your layers. That actually opens up a humongous world of possibilities for your paint projects. So I was just saying, sometimes I want super dark and concentrated lines. And so I just dried all of this with my hair dryer, a ton, so I could finally go back in and get those really dark, exaggerated hairlines. So yeah, loving that. And again, it's not disrupting anything underneath. It sits lovingly on top. So awesome. So another thing I wanted to test was what happens and how well does it work if you're using white and a white ink on top? Will that disrupt the layers underneath? And the answer ends up being no. So I was just using a Copic permanent opaque white, and I was doing all these stars to see if I really lay this on thick, was this going to disrupt the layers underneath? And totally didn't. Super fascinating. Once again, solidifying the fact that these are much more like inks than they are watercolors. Tons of fun. I'll let you enjoy the rest of this really quick, and then I'll just come back with my last minute takeaways. Thanks for hanging in with me while I worked on this silly little project. My biggest takeaways for working with this actually are that no, it doesn't bloom the same way that actual watercolors do. You definitely don't have to water them down. There was at points where I could not get the color dark enough, and I was working with my darkest color, the Payne's gray. I couldn't get it dark enough. So you absolutely do not need to water them down. If you want to get those super dark colors, you have no choice but to get them as concentrated as possible. And there's never going to be anything wrong with that. Yeah, that's my 2 cents about that. They are just like working with inks, the Inktense products. I definitely agree with that. I would just say you just have a longer working time than you do with inks. They do stain. They are not going to lift up very much, but you do get a longer working time than with inks, which set immediately permanent. So they're kind of like this weird hybrid between watercolor and inks. That is how I would define working with them. But the colors are so freaking vibrant and I just love them. And because they're lightfast and archival, they're a much better choice than fountain pen inks. I have an actual hoarding obsession with fountain pen inks, which actually make a pretty poor painting choice, considering probably 80% of all fountain pen inks are not archival and they're not lightfast at all. They do make some for sure, but I have over 70 colors and probably 65 of the 70 are dye-based and they are not lightfast and they're totally going to fade. However, I photograph my work. I'm not worried about it. You can use UV sealers. I do a lot of my works in art journals with them closed, so they're not being exposed to anything. They're going to last a really long time. But remember, you can also take your artwork to a scanner. You can just scan them at home in your own printer, and then your colors and your your prints and your artwork will live on forever, even if the original fades. So people make a huge deal about the lightfast thing, but there's actually quite a lot of workarounds that you can do to preserve your work. Now there's 2025 and we have access to, technology. There's tons of things that we can do to help protect them. So I love these. I don't regret buying the new 8 colors that I have. I'm for sure going to buy more and I'm going to use them a ton. So awesome art school students, brace yourself. I know my Scotland Stones and Stories students are already using them with myself and Lucy in that course. So yeah, we're just having a ton of fun. I learned a lot by playing with this. Hopefully you could see as I was using them, wet on wet, wet on dry, mixing colors, water, no color. It's all fair game and it's all super fun time. So click the video on the link if you want to learn more about fountain pen inks and other ways of working with mixed media, and subscribe, and I'll be back with a new video next Wednesday. Thanks so much. Bye.